YouTube, Dawson Ryder here. In today's video, we're going to be talking about a comparison between the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers Anniversary Special Once and Always and the recent Mighty Morphin Power Rangers Return comic that was co-written by Amy Jo Johnson, Kimberly herself, and also in honor of the 30th anniversary. Doing a little bit of a different setup. I kind of wanted to start recording back here at this table. I kind of liked it, so I'm messing around with it. Let me know what you guys think. These are my popcorn bucket friends. You got Rocket Raccoon, and you wish you had the height and girth at D2. But let's talk about the actual video itself. So I'm going to start by going over some quick pros and cons of things I liked about both, and then kind of talking about which one I personally thought was better. But I want to be clear here at the beginning that I honestly legitimately like both of them. This isn't a video to be like, oh, this one was trash and this one was amazing. It's just kind of an interesting comparison due to the similar premise of solely focusing on an MMPR story for the anniversary. So when it comes to Once and Always, when you have the positives, of course, something you have that you're not going to get in the comic is actually getting to see the actors back. You're not going to be able to fully recreate that experience, although there is an aspect of the comic that kind of does that, which I'll get into, but obviously you're not going to be able to see the legitimate actors on screen, and it was really nice to be able to see them back. In particular, highlights for me were David Yost and Walter Jones, as they haven't returned at all since their original run, and I felt that they didn't miss a beat in getting back into character, so I think that was a huge overall positive of the special. Also, another positive is if you're a longtime fan, even though it was largely focused on MMPR and certainly wouldn't confuse any viewers that only watched MMPR, it did manage to include little nods and Easter eggs and accounted for the greater continuity that the franchise has been running for 30 years, with little connections like SPA, setting up stuff like the Ranger Network and Cranston Industries, and it kind of gave you this sort of headcanon-y material, I guess, for stuff like why the Rangers are all connected in other specials, why they're connected in this one, you know, stuff like why how they can recreate Ranger coins, and that kind of gives you sort of, I guess, tools to answer questions you may have had before, like how are the MMPR Rangers back in previous specials, how are other Ranger powers back? So they did a good job of kind of incorporating more of the mythology, so it felt a little bit more of a rich experience for those that have been following it for a long time. I also did like the premise of Robot Rita. I thought it was kind of cool and kind of crazy that she, like, possessed, like, Alpha 8. That was kind of dark, actually, and Barbara Goodson's performance as Rita in this was really, really good. They also had some nice little nostalgic moments and locations of, like, the juice bar was perfectly recreated. That was one of my favorite things. I really thought that was extremely well done. You know, of course, you got Ron Wasserman back for the music. It was just also really nice to catch up with these versions of the characters after all this time and see what they're up to. Also, even though it was kind of just by accident because of who they could get back and who they couldn't, I did like the lineup they had here, as it kind of accidentally represented all 3 seasons of MMPR by having somebody from, like, Rocky representing Season 2, obviously the OGs, and then Kat representing Season 3, and it was kind of, like, geeky to see her transform with the pterodactyl coin. Plus, that's another small, like, bonus, is I do like that they explained why that happened. And there was an overall a lot of stuff to enjoy with this, and I did have a good time with this special. Now, as far as the negative and kind of more mixed stuff, it was really weird because I felt that the presentation in this was so well mixed. Like, when it came to stuff like the action, there was some scenes that looked surprisingly cinematic for Power Rangers, like the beginning scene, but then other ones like the fight outside of the Juice Bar in Angel Grove looked like a fan film, and it overall had a very cheap-looking presentation, and that creates a debate amongst a lot of people about it. Some people, you know, think that the charm of Toku and stuff is that it looks kind of bad, especially for MMPR, and that's part of it, and that's trying to pay homage to it. But at the same time, it looked even worse than some other PR series that came before it, which is kind of crazy. And I've stated this before, and I stated it in the first video where I compared the first issue, is I think this would have been a good opportunity to show casuals that PR can actually look good and isn't necessarily always a joke. It doesn't necessarily mean it had to look Hollywood good, but they could have done something similar to Dino Thunder and Ninja Storm stunts. I mentioned in that previous video that I had seen clips from Ninja Storm and Dino Thunder's fight scene go viral on Twitter, people being like, holy crap, they have good stunts. So it really wasn't the best look for PR. There was small moments that were really cool, but by and large, it wasn't that great of a showing for it. Same thing with, like, the dialogue and the performances. It was very strange because you'd have really nice scenes, like with Billy and Zach discussing Min's future, that felt really dramatic, almost like they were doing a Cobra Kai-esque reboot, but then you would have some really clunky, weird, cheesy stuff. It was like this weird mix of 2 identities. Speaking of, in terms of another negative, even though I do love the overall concept of Trini's daughter and the story of it, and I think it was a nice way to pay tribute to her, and they had, of course, that nice little tribute scene at the end, which is a positive. I really like that. Just Min didn't work for me. Again, conceptually, it worked. It's just, the acting was so bad, and just, that's probably my least favorite part of this special. Like, I always think about that training scene where she's like, I'm gonna get you, Rita! It felt like a parody. Like, she was definitely one of the more overall negatives for me for that. It just so much about it didn't work in terms of the performance, but like the idea was there and I really did like the idea behind it. It just didn't fully work for me. This isn't necessarily adding any value to the overall comparison, but I do feel stuff like the inclusion of Adam and Aisha was overall wasted. It was really nice that they got him and it was cool that they tied him to SPA. It just ended up being classic PR though, where we're left with more questions, and it would have been nice to have them included a little bit more, even though they were, I guess, doing season 1 focus, but Kat was there too. I don't know, I wish it wasn't as wasted. Now let's get to the return. In regards to the return, now this may be controversial, it seemed like most people liked it, but I actually really liked the selective requel approach of this, where they took this idea of, it wasn't just a story, which has been an idea that's popped up before of it, picking up where MMPR left off only, but a very specific point in time where there was no peace conference. I mean, there was a peace conference, but the characters didn't leave, and the original Core 6 stayed on, and they were basically the only Power Rangers. I really love Elseworlds story like that. I think it's really interesting to explore, and it brought up a lot of different and interesting avenues that I honestly really liked. I also really liked the way the characters were done in this, and this is what I'm talking about when I said, like, of course you're not going to get to see the actors in the comic, but I think because it was written by Amy Jo Johnson, who obviously knows the actors and was on set and saw the characters perform, the way she wrote them in a lot of the scenes, whether it was a flashback or a present day, felt really natural. It felt like I was actually seeing that character. Like, obviously it's not the same as seeing them on screen, but the dialogue felt so much more natural than the weird TV show dialogue. And I thought that was really cool. I mean, there was some flashback scenes where they were at the juice bar, oddly enough, and it was just simply drawings, but just the vibe of it and the dialogue made you feel like you were there, and it gave you that kind of nostalgic feel of popping in a season 1 episode before it absolutely drives you mad after the second episode you watched and you have to leave. But I thought that was well done in a way that I was surprised that this was able to evoke nostalgic feelings or whatever, just from panels and stuff. But just the way the dialogue went down between the characters felt like a very natural version. Like, I really believe these were older versions of the characters I watched on the TV show. And another really cool element, which I guess is just speculation, but it was pointed out to me in my review of the first issue, and when you pay attention it seems like it's true, that this was like kind of autobiographical to a degree, and that it was a lot about Amy Jo Johnson's experience with the franchise, kind of put to page in this universe, and that extends out to the other characters, I think. You know, David Yost's work with Charity as represented in Billy. I think the idea of Zach being the only Ranger that's out and famous is maybe a nod to him being one of the first ones to do conventions. Of course, you know, there's a lot of stuff going on with Austin St. John right now, but the idea of him wanting to rescue people probably represented his time as a paramedic. Then of course, Amy Jo Johnson having, you know, what was speculated on as a mixed relationship with the franchise, that she didn't do a lot of stuff involving it for years and years, and then eventually came back to the con circuit and charged like a ridiculous amount for a pizza party or something. That's what I remember. But I really like that the way it was incorporated. Not the pizza party. I don't think that was in there. Pizza time. I thought that was really neat. I especially like the idea of her kind of rejecting it, obviously for very different reasons in the story, but it was well done. It kind of reminds you of watching an episode of like Buffy or Star Trek where like the message or the story is pretty cleverly disguised, where you can kind of tell what they're going for, but it's so well wrapped up in it, it's not right in your face. But I liked the way that that was done, especially then at the end with her re-embracing it and finding a new way to engage with it and finding a positive about it. I thought that was a really cool and neat detail. I also loved their version of Min. Like, when it first started, I thought, like, oh, they basically wanted to do Min, but they're being weird by making it their third cousin's half removed or whatever, what it was supposed to be initially. Kind of reminds me of how they went out of the way to not say great power and great responsibility in Amazing Spider-Man. You have the obligation to do those things. It's like, just say the line. Then it had nothing to do with Trini. I mean, obviously she stole her morpher, but it wound up being Selena, the daughter of Rita and Zed, which is a really cool story beat. And she got an awesome evil Yellow Ranger costume. That was really cool, too. And that ties into something else I really liked, is I liked how many twists and turns were in this story. Like, I felt from the beginning I generally knew where things were going to go, and that didn't end up happening. I mean, some broader strokes about kind of bringing back the Power Rangers and next generation aspects of new characters were definitely there, but it hardly went down like I thought it was going to at all, especially with stuff like Selena, her becoming the evil Yellow Ranger, the overall cliffhanger, and then even Olivia, who I thought was going to lead the new team as the Green Ranger, winds up becoming the Pink Ranger, and then Tommy coming back as well. Honestly, I didn't see any of that coming, at least in that form. I thought maybe there was a chance we would see Tommy again, but not permanently. So I really liked that it surprised me when I felt like I was going into this saying, I'm still enjoying this, but I think I know where it's going, and I didn't. Speaking of the Tommy return, I thought that was really well done. Based on an interview, I guess it was supposedly not planned. It was planned before JDF's passing, but of course with his passing it made it retroactively kind of more meaningful, and I thought it was really well done. I couldn't help compare it to like the monumental moment where Min morphs in Once and Always, and for me that didn't rang hollow. I didn't feel anything. And not like I got emotional or anything, but I definitely felt something just seeing him morph on screen in return. I think because his death is still so recent. And I don't know, there's something felt more impactful about it. And it's different than seeing Boom Tommy because it's kind of like a variant, and this is also a variant, but it's meant to be like a version of Prime Tommy. And I thought that was really well done, and it's really interesting and opens up a lot of possibilities for the future. And I like the way it ended with that like kind of cliffhanger. Like some people would maybe be mad it didn't close off, but it leaves you wondering what could happen next. Even if they didn't have that cliffhanger, things are open-ended enough that I'd be curious to explore it. Now, as far as some negatives, they're honestly relatively minor, and it largely comes down to pacing. I really wish this story had been 1 to 2 more issues longer, just because it did feel kind of rushed in the sense that we had this kind of nice setup where we took our time, and then once they were kidnapped, we kind of put pedal to the metal commander, and then all the end stuff was great, but it felt like there was a middle, like, missing chunk. In particular, I would have liked to spend a little bit more time with the main MMPR Rangers when they're older, and I think it would have been cool to maybe have an issue about Olivia's journey trying to rescue her mom and friends, just because it felt so sudden, and I would have liked to have gotten to have known her character a little bit more, and it just felt like even just one issue more and spreading things out would have been nice. It just felt a little bit rushed and condensed. This is more like fan nitpicky stuff that doesn't really matter, but some of the lore was a little bit weird in this. Somebody in the final issue comments mentioned like how it's weird and funny that like in Once and Always Min couldn't morph because the morpher didn't deem her worthy or whatever because she made fun of her friends once. Stupid Dino Charge with the rules. Everybody teases their friends. I'm sorry, that episode still makes me mad. The morpher didn't let her morph, but then the morpher lets an evil Selena morph. For me, for the most part, usually when stuff like that happens, whether it's PR or other series, I just kind of write it off as things work differently in different universes. And I can kind of buy that for this, that the power coins maybe are slightly different amongst the universes and how they work. However, the only one that bothered me, and again, this is a pathetic fan thing to care about that doesn't matter in life, but was that weird dialogue in the first episode, or the first issue, where they said that Jason wanted them to all stop morphing so he could have all the grid power to himself. That's not how the grid works. Like, I can't think of a single other PR continuity, whether it's the show, the Boom comics, the movies, any of the other offshoots where it's worked anywhere like that. And the only reason that's kind of a problem, and it's not a problem, these are non-problems, guys, these aren't real issues, is only because the morphing grid has been established to be multiversal, so it's not like there's a different grid in every universe, so the rules should theoretically work the same, and I don't know, it just felt like that bothered me because I felt like they did their homework on all kinds of other stuff. Also, small little negatives that don't matter. Even though I like the selective reqeul stuff, and clearly we're going to be touching on the White Ranger thing, this did bring up a lot of questions about stuff, mainly regarding the Green Ranger, because around that time, I think we were in that era where we were constantly saving Tommy. Like, Tommy's so important to the team, but he'd be like, oh, I sprained my leg, you gotta save me, the powers are weak. So I was curious, like, what was going on with the Green Ranger powers? I guess it could be as simple as it was retconned that the Green Ranger powers weren't weak, but it raised a lot of questions like that. But as you can see, a lot of my negatives for this are overall pretty minor. They're just kind of nitpicks about questions of continuity, which are pretty easy to let go because I still enjoyed the story. But overall, guys, which one did I like better? And like I said at the beginning, I really do enjoy both. I'm glad we got Once and Always. I thought it was a decent 30th anniversary special. It was nice to see other characters highlighted we hadn't seen in a while. But I gotta say, I liked MMPR The Return better. I really did. I think it was a better tribute, just because I know it didn't incorporate all the legacy, and I know that might be a big negative for people, like, if The Return had somehow been a live-action special or something, that it would have been this selective requel that ignored the other years afterwards. So that'd be a negative for some people. I understand that it wouldn't bother me as much like if The Return was the special because it was still just so well done. I felt there was a lot of care put into it. It felt a lot more mature, not serious for adults, but it just felt like something that would be more enjoyable for especially the casual fans that would watch the show and then read the comic now and be like, wow, this is like a Power Ranger story that can actually be good. It's not the same cheesy garbage I remember. Whereas Once and Always kind of just proved their point. Like, they're like, I remember this as being awesome, but I think it's cheesy crap now. Let me put this on. They put Once and Always on. Yeah, I was right. But MMPR The Return, like, shows that you can actually make good stories out of this. I mean, it seemed to do pretty well. It was trending on Twitter the day of its final issue, so I just liked The Return more. I found the story to be more engaging. They did a surprisingly good job of making me feel like I was spending time with the real characters, which is hard to do because it's just on the page, but the way the dialogue was written and because it was written by somebody that knew the characters and the actors, there was moments that felt really tangible in an unexpected way. And even though they ignored the rest of the history, it still felt like a nice tribute to that era, and it felt very personal because it was done so closely by somebody like that. And the fact that, at least I believe, she put a very personal story in there was really cool. And honestly, if I had to pick what to get a continuation of, I would much rather see more stories from this universe just because I'm really curious about the way it works and I love those Elseworld stories. Honestly, I think if they could have somehow gotten a live-action version of this done, if, JDF hadn't unfortunately passed and you could get things aligned, it would be really cool. But I think this would make like a kick-ass animated series that would go on Netflix or something and show like people that cool stories can be made out of this. And don't get me wrong, I liked Once and Always. I just thought MMPR The Return was far more interesting and engaging. But what did you guys think? Which one did you prefer? What are things you like or don't like about both specials? Let me know in the comments as always. Until next time, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and climb the steps and ring that bell to get notifications for my videos. Dawson Ryder, signing out.